I'm Tammy Baldwin, and I approve this message.
I'm Leah Vukmir, and I approve this message.
I'm Scott Milfred.
And I'm Phil Hands.
And we approve this podcast. Now, probably all of the people we just played would not approve of our podcast. We took those clips from the tail end of their recent campaign ads.
Despite the fact that the primary isn't till August, and it's June right now, we got a couple of months till the election, but it's never too early for election ads.
We're already starting to see TV ads, web ads, online ads on madison.com, I've been noticing, and we're only going to see more and more and more.
Until we're sick of them, literally.
Yeah, until we almost tune them out. I mean, generally campaign ads, I think, are not the place to get good information about campaigns.
In fact, I would argue that watching a campaign ad is the worst way to understand who a candidate is.
They almost always focus on emotion, and their messaging is so simple, it's almost ridiculous. They're kind of like the tabloid newspapers at the grocery store checkout, where it's kind of hard not to look at them, but it's also pretty hard to take them seriously.
You're right. We know that aliens and Elvis are not running for Senate this time around.
But nonetheless, today on Center Stage, the Wisconsin State Journal's political podcast from the sensible center of Wisconsin politics, we are going to talk about all of these dumb ads. I don't know if they're all dumb.
They're all dumb, Scott.
They're all dumb. And react to some of them. And we may even do this throughout the election this fall. We may periodically just pull some of the latest ads and point out what's ridiculous about them, what we might like about them, what we think is some good messaging or bad. Once again, I'm Scott Milfred with the Wisconsin State Journal.
And I'm Phil Hands, editorial cartoonist of the Wisconsin State Journal.
And we are half of the State Journal editorial board.
The better looking half.
U.S. Senate race, Tammy Baldwin is the incumbent Democrat.
And
for
there's
US
two
Senate.
Republicans vying to challenge her. The sort of party favorite is Leah Vukmir. She's a state senator from Brookfield, Wisconsin. And she's going up against Kevin Nicholson, who is sort of an upstart candidate.
So the first ad we're going to play, Phil, we just had a story about it in the Wisconsin State Journal. It was Leah Vukmir's first television ad.
I know where you live, and I'm going to come for you. You're going to die, and I'm going to be the one who does it.
Ever have someone threaten your life for what you believe in? I have. When Scott Walker and I beat the union bosses, cut billions in taxes, and defunded Planned Parenthood, the left couldn't take it. With President Trump, we can do the same in Washington. Standing on principle takes guts. I know what it takes. I'm Leah Vukmir, and I approve this message.
It was a little ooh. It was a little spooky, wasn't it?
It felt like the intro to a horror movie or something like that.
Yeah, the lighting was dim, and it pans across, since our podcasters can't see the ad, it pans across family photos of Leah Vukmir, and then the camera pans over to her at this table, and she's got this handgun next to her. And
it's holstered.
It is holstered, and I was also struck by she's wearing the cross around her neck. You got the gun and the cross.
It's just like a perfect Republican symbol, right? A cross and a gun.
I get why she did the ad. I mean, she's running against Kevin Nicholson, who's a military guy, and stresses that he's pro-gun. So she's got the gun right there. She must be pro-gun, and she's not going to back down. She mentions Trump and Walker.
Yep.
I mean, it's an emotional ad, and there's no question that back in the debates over Act 10, a lot of these lawmakers did get some death threats. Some of them were taken very seriously by law enforcement. If you listen to what she's actually saying, to me it didn't make any sense. For example, we beat the union bosses, cut billions in taxes, defunded Planned Parenthood, and then she says, with President Trump, we can do the same thing in Washington. Well, we're going to beat the union bosses in Washington? I don't think the unions
there's
are...
no federal employee union, right?
Not that can do much of anything. And then, that's not a big problem. Cut billions in taxes. Well, they already did that.
They did do that, didn't they?
Defunded Planned Parenthood. I mean, I think
It's pretty close to defunded anyway.
Pretty much done what he can. I mean, I guess she's basically just saying, I'm with them.
I mean, Jimmy pointed out that those were not actual threats. Those phone calls were not real phone calls that she actually received. That's an actor reading a message.
I don't think that she's lying about it. I don't doubt that a lot of them got threats. The thing that I more wondered about, as long as you're going along sort of this fact-checking kind of attitude towards it, my initial question was, is it her gun, and how long has she actually had a gun? Presumably she has concealed carry. Or
don't you know that all Republicans are born with guns, Scott? Gun ownership begins at conception.
But did she really get a gun because of a threat, or is this just some symbolism? It's not even her gun. I'll have to email the campaign. If I get a quick response from them, I'll jump in here on the podcast and provide some more information. But I still think it's effective. I mean, she seems, she's not playing in this ad to the general voting population.
I'd be surprised if this ad is even running in Madison media markets, is it?
I doubt it. There are a lot of Republican voters in Dean County just because we're large. But nonetheless, I haven't seen it yet, other than just looking at it on the internet.
You don't watch TV, Scott.
True. But I think if you're trying to win a Republican primary in the middle of summer in August, you got to motivate a small band of voters, and right now in the polls, it appears she's kind of neck and neck with Nicholson. Nicholson may be a little bit ahead of her, and he may have more money. So she's trying to be tough. She's trying to say she can stand up to the left, and she's on the side of Trump and Walker, and it's probably a decent ad for her for the primary.
Well, I think the most important thing for Republican primary voters is willingness to stand up to the left and call them out for their ridiculousness.
Yeah, if she survives the general election, I don't think she's going to want a dark, dreary ad with a gun in it, is my guess. But we'll see.
We'll see.
The next ad is by her opponent, Kevin Nicholson. Actually, it's not by him. It's by this PAC that's spending a whole bunch of money on his behalf, and they compare him to Ronald Reagan. And why?
Because he used to be a Democrat, too.
Just like with Ronald Reagan, reality turned Kevin Nicholson into a conservative. More than 100 combat missions in Iraq, the birth of his children. It all shaped his conversion. Now the outsider and businessman is passionate about spreading his conservative agenda to help Wisconsin families like his. He strongly believes in the Second Amendment, the right to life, and like President Trump, wants to build a wall to secure our border. Kevin Nicholson is the right choice for U.S. Senate.
I think it's nice they got a nice, kindly old man to do that ad. Doesn't he sound like he's your grandfather? And he looks out for the country and just cares about the future.
He does. It almost sounds like Burl Ives. Do you know who Burl Ives is?
I do. Silver and gold, silver and gold.
Yeah, it's like they got Burl Ives doing his ad. But yeah, I thought, again, very simplistic. It's basically saying, hey, he was a military guy. He's a family man. He wants to build a wall and vote for him.
Yep. Conservative values, even though he used to be a Democrat. Didn't mention he used to be the head of the college Democrats.
No, didn't really get into all of that. But, tying yourself to Reagan, I mean, that's a good way to explain why you didn't used to be a Republican and now you are.
Because maybe Reagan wanted to build that wall too, right?
But Reagan was a lefty who became a righty, so I mean...
the only president who was ever head of a union, actually.
Reagan is still revered, even though the new Trump Republican Party really doesn't stand for a whole lot of Reagan and things, at least in my estimation. Trump does stand for giant military, so that's like Reagan.
Yeah.
But he's totally not a gentleman. I mean, Reagan was a gentleman, and Trump is not. And Reagan was free trade, Trump isn't. I mean, Reagan worked with Democrats, Trump doesn't. I don't know. We could go on and on.
Reagan had a full head of hair, Trump doesn't.
Well, he does have a full head of hair. It's just
maybe
maybe
move it around a little bit.
Yeah, it's maybe just not all his. Is one of those ads better than the other? I guess Vukmir's is going to get more attention.
It is. Well, it actually shows that Vukmir's done stuff in the past too. I mean, Nicholson has never done anything to prove his conservative values. Vukmir can Vukmir's proving that she stood up to the union bosses and the angry left, and she's not afraid of them. And she's got these conservative principles that she's had for a long time. And who knows about Kevin Nicholson?
Yeah, but there again, if she's part of the swamp, then maybe that Nicholson, it helps Nicholson.
Well, I think that's what Kevin Nicholson is hoping for. I think I think this race is going to come down to who's part of the swamp and who's a real conservative. That's sort of the two major themes I hear in the race, because they're both trying to be as Trumpy as possible.
Yeah, let's go to Tammy Baldwin's latest ad. This one was set in Beloit.
A ship can't move without an engine.
And American naval ships cannot move without us.
Thanks to Tammy Baldwin, that's how it's going to stay. Tammy Baldwin's Made in America Shipbuilding Act makes sure ships for our armed forces are built here in the U.S.
And that means thousands of jobs.
Tammy Baldwin has been a fierce fighter for keeping jobs here in America.
She's backed us 100%.
I'm Tammy Baldwin, and I'm fighting to do right by Wisconsin workers. That's why I approve this message.
The ad was filmed at Fairbanks Morris in Beloit, and they make diesel engines for Navy ships. Some of these engines are heavier than 200 tons.
That's a big engine.
That is a big engine. I don't know how they get those. I guess those are some of those wide loads that you see on the highway.
Are you saying that Tammy Baldwin supports the military-industrial complex?
Not only that, but she's had on her website that she's going to put Wisconsin first. Does that remind you of anybody?
It does sound like something.
Yeah, Donald Trump is putting America first. She's kind of playing in a way to the Trump phenomenon where it's Wisconsin first and it's pro-military and it's pro-America workers, not these workers overseas. We're not going to buy anything for our ships overseas.
Well, Tammy Baldwin's been opposed to free trade deals long before Donald Trump was.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, they really align on this issue to some degree, which is an uncomfortable thing, I think, for the left, even though they're probably happy that they have a president who's very skeptical of the global economy.
So I think it's interesting that, while Kevin Nicholson has to introduce himself in ads, and Leah Vukmir is definitely playing to a Republican audience with hers. This ad is definitely geared towards a general audience of I'm going to save jobs for everybody and I'm pro-military. That's not an ad geared towards winning a Democratic primary.
No, and she doesn't have to win a Democratic primary.
That's right.
Yeah, she's already won it. She's the candidate. So she has the luxury of looking past this primary and talking to a wider audience. On the one hand, she actually gets into something specific, which is this ship. She wants to tighten up the rules so that when the military builds equipment, particularly the Navy and ships, they've got to use products that are made in America, not overseas. There already are rules like that, but she wants to make them stricter. And apparently, this was according to Marine Log website I found it on. Wisconsin has 21 companies that provide equipment and components for U.S. aircraft carriers.
Whether the military wants them or not.
Yeah. So she's saying, I've got this bill, and it kind of sounds like in the ad that that's already a law. Well, it's not. It's just a bill she proposed this spring. The odds of it passing anytime soon are very, very small because it takes a long time to get through.
Scott, this is an ad. This isn't real life.
Well, on the one hand, I'm giving her credit for actually pointing to some specific policy. On the other hand, it's kind of misleading. But
and I will point out that she has stepped up to save manufacturing facilities that produce Navy vessels in Wisconsin in the past. I think there's one in Marinette Marine that produced that lateral ship or whatever like that.
Right. Yep.
And even though the military didn't necessarily want that ship, she pushed to keep that plant open to save the Wisconsin jobs. This is where good liberal Democrats are propping up the military and wasting taxpayer dollars on equipment the military doesn't actually want.
Yeah, it's awkward. On the other hand, seems like it's probably a pretty good ad for her.
It's a good issue.
Because, they're going to tag, whoever wins this, either Nicholson or Vukmir, they're going to tag her as the Madison liberal. Every race comes down to that if you're from Madison. And so what is she doing to show she's not the Madison liberal? She's hanging out with people building military equipment outside of Madison and saying, we're going to put Wisconsin first.
And in the ad, she's also wearing protective eyewear, which is very essential to prove that she's actually in danger of losing an eye.
Safety first, Phil. All right. Scott Walker just put out his sixth ad.
Sixth ad.
That's according to our latest story by Matt DeFore.
What does Matt know?
A lot.
More than me.
Yeah, more than us. In any case, let's roll film. That's a Muppet reference.
I teach elementary school in Racine, And I can tell you, one size does not fit all when it comes to our kids. And Governor Walker gets it. He gave schools flexibility to put money where it matters most, in our classroom. And his latest budget adds $200 more per year for every student.
With a record investment in schools, more money for our technical college programs, and a 6-year tuition freeze for all UW campuses, we're putting students first.
You know, when you have that jangly guitar in the background, you can't be doing anything bad, right?
Did you notice he's putting people first too? He said he's putting
students first.
He's putting first.
America first, Wisconsin first, and students first.
Yeah, there's some interesting Trumpian messaging.
Can they all be first?
Well, if they're tied, I guess he can put them all out in front. Governor Walker is another person who gets to look past the primary. There's these 10 Democrats fighting for attention and the chance to run against him.
Fighting for scraps of the electorate.
Yeah, and he's just hanging out and running all these positive ads about, oh, shucks, aren't I a great guy?
I'm just such a great guy.
And that's a real luxury to be doing that. What he's being careful of, because you notice, if he ever singles somebody out, they take that as a point of pride and brag about it. So, for example, when he said, oh my gosh, Tony Evers used the Lord's name in vain at the Democratic convention, this is terrible. And of course, Walker all the time ignoring that his president is the most foul-mouthed guy there is. But anyway, when he does that, when he criticizes Evers, Evers will immediately say, see, I'm the guy he's afraid of.
I'm the threat. Yeah, look at me.
So Walker's trying really hard to just pump up his positives, tout what he thinks is popular, or tout what he thinks he's having difficulty with, try to turn it around, and then let the Democrats, worry about themselves.
I like that for this ad, he found like the one teacher in Wisconsin that doesn't hate Scott Walker.
In Racine.
In Racine of all places, right?
Yeah. But what we're finding in polls is that the public is saying that public education is a higher priority than they were saying, say, 4 or 8 years ago.
It's like the number one priority this year, I think. Maybe I don't know if that's beating out roads is the number one priority they want people to focus on in the election, but it seems like a big one.
And if he does wind up facing the leader in the Democratic primary right now, Tony Evers is a school superintendent.
And a former teacher, I think,
too. So he's going to be taking a lot of flack from Tony Evers on public education. He's getting out in front of that, and he's trying to say, hey, I just increased education by a whole bunch.
I'm going out on a limb here, Scott. I think if it is Tony Evers and Scott Walker, I think the teachers union will endorse Tony Evers.
Really?
I'm just making that hypothesis right now.
Yeah. I don't even think he'll get the janitors. I think he's going to lose that one. But I think he does those ads well. He is going to have a big advantage over the Democrat nominee in just having months and months of sort of these positive ads, reintroducing him, pushing some of his messaging and softening his image.
I don't know. I mean, people really know who Scott Walker is in this state. I mean, everywhere you go, people know who Scott Walker is. I can go to any classroom in the state and put Scott Walker's picture up on the screen, and the group of third graders knows who it is. So I don't know if there's much you can do to change his image. The people who love Scott Walker are going to love Scott Walker, and I'm not sure there's a whole lot of people in the middle he can change their mind about. But you better try, I guess, right?
Yeah. Interestingly, he's been telling the Republicans they need to wake up because a blue wave could be coming, and we need to get out and really tell people what we've done for the state. And so this sort of fits his theme of, he's saying the left is angry, we need to be positive and stress all these great things we're doing. And those ads at least reinforce that, I think.
He's got a bunch of ads sort of along these lines, too. He's got an ad about like technical college and education. He's got an ad about healthcare premiums. And there's some other issues that he's sort of taken on, which are sort of, I would say, not necessarily bread and butter conservative issues. Like healthcare and education aren't necessarily things that Republicans get all fired up about. But he's putting ads out about these issues to try and talk to a wider audience.
Yeah, and as we've said in the past podcasts, he's trying to run more as a moderate because this is going to be probably, well, in his own words, he says this is going to be the most difficult election of his career. All right, let's go to Tony Evers. And Tony Evers, none of the Democrats have really been advertising much at all. I had to go back to last fall to get this radio ad, so here it is.
Have you heard the saying, it's too good to be true? It probably is. Well, the Donald Trump, Scott Walker $3 billion deal for Foxconn might sound good until you look at the fine print. For starters, did you know that the Trump-Walker deal will take Wisconsin taxpayers 25 years just to break even? That means a kid born today could graduate from college by the time we might see a nickel on the return for our investment. But worse, those promised Foxconn jobs aren't even required to be jobs for Wisconsin residents. Contractors that build the facilities aren't required to be Wisconsin contractors. And the deal would exempt Foxconn from critical environmental protections. Sounds good for Foxconn, but what's in it for the rest of us? Just think if we invested that money in our schools instead. I'm Tony Evers, and I'm running for governor because...
All right, so Foxconn is definitely a ripe source of criticism that the Democrats are using. All of them are ripping on the Foxconn deal.
Well, we had some reporters out in western Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago talking about voters, because that's a kind of a key area of the state. Walker's spending a lot of time out there. And western Wisconsin, they're not going to see a whole lot of benefit from Foxconn. So I think this is one of the reasons the Democrats are talking about this is because they feel like it's going to play well in areas of the state that are sort of swing areas that they haven't always done well in the past.
Yeah, and particularly the rural areas where Trump did very well. Yeah, and, again, I'm getting too literal on these ads. But, of course, we're not going to guarantee, Tony Evers, that every job, every employee at the company has to be from Wisconsin. I mean,
well, especially when it's like it's within 10 miles of the Illinois border, too.
Yeah, it's probably not even legal to do that. But in any case, he's stressing that a lot in a roundabout way that a lot of these jobs are going to go to Illinois people, not Wisconsin people.
I think it's a winning issue for the Democrats, at least in the primary. And I think as they're talking to rural voters, what's Foxconn done for me lately? And it's a big giveaway, and I think it's an issue they're going to keep hammering on.
Again, this ad's a little old, but the latest Marquette poll shows that he's still in the lead, so he's probably feeling pretty comfortable that he just needs to keep his name out there, keep getting attention, which he's cleverly doing, and he hopes he'll win the nomination. If he does win, and this is premature, but if he does win from that last ad, he and Scott Walker in those ads were about the most mild-mannered people you ever come across.
It's going to be a very pleasant election.
Now, the ads will probably be nasty. I mean, that's the thing, though, is at this stage in the campaign is not when the campaigns get nasty. When they get nasty, it's in the last month, and then the closer and closer you get to the actual election, the worse and worse the ads get.
And those are usually the third-party groups that get really nasty, so
yes.
The candidates can keep their hands clean. So
yeah, they can say, well, it wasn't mine.
You'll have groups like, Citizens for a Responsible America will be putting out ads talking about how horrible Tony Evers is or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, and some people say that those ads are actually out there to either drive down. Some people argue that those are just there to drive down turnout and get people just discouraged about the race so they don't show up to vote in the first place.
Yeah. You can't not pay attention to these ads because so many people are seeing them. So I think we'll periodically during the campaign, we will jump in and chew over some of the latest ads.
I was going to say, I have a great idea for my super PAC if it ever comes out.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Cartoonists for a More Ridiculous America.
Oh, I would support that.
Yeah.
Who could not support that?
I think we should start fundraising right now. I think Donald Trump's probably our first large donor to that campaign.
Find and follow our podcast, Center Stage with Milfred and Hands, on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud.